Welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive, curated specifically for you from the stack of sources, articles, and notes you've shared with us.
Yeah, and we have a really fascinating set of materials to go through today.
We really do. Our mission today is to explore a truly mind-bending text from 2025.
Right, the one by George James Dukas.
Exactly. It's titled Speed of Light, Transdimensional Unified Field Theory, or, TDUFT for short.
It is definitely a mouthful, but the concepts inside are incredible.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And whether you consider yourself a hardcore physics buff or you're just insanely curious about how the universe actually ticks, we're going to explore an idea that attempts to rewrite our entire understanding of reality.
Using pure, unadulterated geometry.
Yeah, geometry. So consider this hook to get us started. What if the universe doesn't contain a single ounce of dark matter?
Which is a huge claim right off the bat.
Right. What if everything from the ultimate cosmic speed limit of light to the exact mass of the Higgs boson is actually dictated by the golden ratio?
It sounds like science fiction, but the math is, well, it's really something else.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can even begin to figure out how light moves or how matter gets its weight, we have to understand the completely new language this theory uses to describe reality.
Yeah, to grasp the grammar of this new language, we have to rethink how the universe behaves at its most fundamental level.
I mean, standard physics is mostly about particles, right?
Right, but TDUFT treats physics not as a collection of random particles just bumping into each other, but as an interaction between two distinct behaviors.
And those are additive geometry and multiplicative waves.
Exactly. In this framework, geometry is inherently additive. You are adding dimensions, stepping from one spatial plane to another.
Uh-huh.
Waves, on the other hand, are multiplicative. And the text argues that these two vastly different behaviors, the additive structure and the multiplicative wave, they meet at only two conceptual points.
Which are 1 and 0.
Right. They meet at the number 1, which represents unity or the birth of a physical particle, and they meet at 0, which represents absolute separation or empty space.
I'm trying to picture how those two things physically interact.
Yeah.
If geometry is additive, I imagine it like a set of building blocks.
That's a good way to look at it.
Like you start with one block, you snap another one onto it and another. You are step by step adding pieces to build a physical structure.
Exactly. It's a structural addition.
But a wave being multiplicative, that feels more like a volume knob on a stereo.
Ooh, I like that.
When you turn up the bass, the sound wave doesn't just put one single unit of sound in the corner of the room. It multiplies the energy, pushing it across the entire space simultaneously.
Right. It fills the container.
So this theory is essentially claiming that the act of stacking those physical blocks and the act of turning up the ambient volume of energy eventually collide.
Yes.
And when they do, they either resolve into a solid 1 particle or a void 0.
Building on that volume knob analogy, the engine driving both the blocks and the volume requires only two core variables.
Okay.
First, we have phi, the Greek letter phi, which in this theory represents velocity.
Got it. Velocity is phi.
Second, we have psi, the other Greek letter, which represents time. Everything we observe in the universe is simply a function of velocity and time combining, multiplying, or dividing.
So dimensions aren't just empty space.
No, not at all. Dimensions themselves are not just empty containers where things happen. They are infinite conjugates of these two variables.
Which naturally leads to why phi is so important here. In mathematics, phi is the golden ratio.
Roughly 1.618.
Right, and we see it everywhere in nature. It's the spiral of a nautilus shell, the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower, the shape of a spinning galaxy.
It's ubiquitous.
But usually we treat the golden ratio as just a cool aesthetic pattern that nature happens to like. Dukas' theory elevates it, right?
It does. It's not just a pattern in this text. It is the literal mathematical velocity of space itself.
That is wild.
What's fascinating here is the sheer scope of the universe this creates. When you use the golden ratio as the fundamental rule for how dimensions stack and waves multiply, you get an infinite fractal.
An infinite fractal, so no Big Bang.
Well, we are so used to the Big Bang model, the idea of a universe exploding outward from a single central point. But a fractal universe has no center.
It just goes on forever in both directions.
Exactly. No matter where you look or how far you zoom in or zoom out, the geometric pattern endlessly repeats. Under this model, the ether of space isn't an empty vacuum waiting to be filled.
It's a structure.
Yes, it is a dense, multi-dimensional lattice.
And this multi-dimensional lattice is how the theory completely eliminates the need for dark matter.
Which is one of its biggest claims.
Right, because in standard physics, scientists look at how fast outer galaxies are spinning, and they realize there isn't enough visible stuff to generate the gravity needed to hold those galaxies together.
So they invent a placeholder.
Yeah, they assume there must be a massive amount of invisible dark matter doing the heavy lifting. But Dukas argues that dark matter is just an illusion.
It replaces that missing mass with what it terms infinite dimensional recursion.
Infinite dimensional recursion. Break that down for me.
Because the universe is an infinite fractal, the gravitational forces we measure aren't coming from invisible clumps of matter. They are the mathematical result of infinite dimensions recursively acting upon the visible dimensions.
So the math itself is generating the gravity.
Basically, the structural integrity of a galaxy is provided by the overlapping geometry of the lattice itself.
That blows my mind, because it means the cosmos is literally holding itself together with math.
Pure geometry.
And this isn't just happening on a galactic scale. The text applies this exact same fractal recursion all the way down to the atomic level.
Yes, it scales perfectly.
It describes the atom not as a miniature solar system with electrons orbiting a nucleus like we usually picture it, but as a rigid geometric structure with exactly one particle per shell.
And there's a really interesting detail about those shells.
Right, as you move toward the center of this atomic lattice, roughly 30% of the inner shells are completely empty.
Which seems counterintuitive.
Yeah, and they extend inward to infinity through a process called, let me make sure I get this right, entropic infinite harmonic attenuation.
That phrase, entropic infinite harmonic attenuation, is critical.
Okay, why?
It describes how energy loses a tiny fraction of itself as it echoes through the fractal layers. The atom is squaring its velocity and taking the square root of time from shell to shell, mirroring the macrostructure of the cosmos perfectly.
Okay, so we have this picture of a universe that is an infinite repeating fractal built purely on velocity, the golden ratio in time.
Right.
But to prove a theory like this isn't just philosophical science fiction. It has to accurately describe something real. It has to dictate the ultimate cosmic speed limit.
The speed of light.
Exactly. Let's examine how the text derives the speed of light entirely from this geometry.
The core equation states that c equals the sum of 2 plus the inverse of the golden ratio plus the inverse square of the golden ratio.
Okay.
We then subtract a tiny variable called epsilon and multiply the entire thing by 10 to the 8th power.
Okay, I want to pause and push back on the first half of that equation because doing the mental math on those golden ratio fractions yields a very strange result.
It does. It's remarkably clean.
Yeah, if you take the number 2, add the inverse of the golden ratio, and add the inverse square of the golden ratio, they add up to exactly 3.
A perfect, clean, whole number 3.
Right, the text calls this Trinitarian recursion. But we have measured the speed of light in a vacuum. It is roughly 299.9 million meters per second.
Right.
It is not exactly 300 million.
Yeah.
So if the base geometry perfectly equals 3, where does the messy reality of the actual speed of light come from?
The messy reality is accounted for by epsilon.
Ah, epsilon.
You must subtract epsilon from that perfect 3 before you multiply. In this framework, epsilon represents the physical entropy of the infinite fractal.
So that's the infinite harmonic attenuation we touched on earlier.
Exactly.
So it's like plucking a guitar string.
How so?
Well, if you pluck a string in a perfect vacuum, in theory it should ring forever. But in reality, as the sound wave travels through the material of the guitar and the air and bounces off the walls, it loses an infinitesimally tiny amount of energy to the environment.
It attenuates.
Yeah, it decays.
That is a brilliant way to visualize epsilon. As light moves through the multidimensional lattice of the universe, it experiences a tiny inherent bleed-off of energy.
Like dimensional friction.
Exactly, dimensional friction. The value of this friction, epsilon, is approximately 0.002-07542.
Which means the speed of light isn't a random universal constant.
You know, it's a highly specific geometric outcome.
It is a perfect whole number 3 that has just been slightly dampened by the natural friction of moving through an infinite fractal space.
Precisely. You take 3, subtract the 0.002-07542 of entropic decay, multiply it, and you arrive at the exact empirically measured speed of light.
That is wild.
Furthermore, the math behind that tiny epsilon value is remarkably dense. The entropy has 2 components, velocity and time.
Okay.
The time portion of this decay perfectly aligns with the Roberts-Ramanujan equation.
Srinivasa Ramanujan. He was famous for his ability to intuitively grasp infinite mathematical series, right?
Right. Using his equation to define the time decay shows us that the friction slowing down light isn't a physical object blocking its path, but the mathematical resistance of an infinite series unfolding.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because once we subtract that Ramanujan friction from our perfect 3, the final step is multiplying by 10 to the 8th power.
Right, 10 to the 8th.
In traditional physics, whenever we see a base 10 exponent, we assume it's just human scaffolding. We use meters and seconds, and we count in base 10 because we happen to have 10 fingers.
It's an arbitrary human measurement.
Exactly. We assume the universe doesn't actually care about the number 10 or the number 8, but TDUFT argues that 10 to the 8th is hard-coded into the physics.
It claims that the exponent 8 represents a literal dimensional descent.
A descent from where?
Energy begins in the highest structural layer of this model, the 8th dimension, referred to as the D8 ether.
Okay.
It cascades downward, shedding energy and crossing dimensional boundaries until it finally manifests as a photon in the 2nd dimension, or D2.
Wow.
The speed of light is the velocity of that recursive descent from D8 to D2.
That fundamentally changes what a meter or a second is.
It does. They become structural.
Right. They aren't just arbitrary ticks on a human tape measure. They are proportional fractions of this dimensional cascade.
Exactly.
So light is generated in the D8 ether, and it falls down the mathematical ladder until it becomes a photon moving through the 2nd dimension. But a photon is just energy.
Pure energy.
It has no mass. You can't build a planet or a star or a human body out of pure light. How does this moving geometry turn into the physical heavy matter we interact with every day?
The emergence of mass is the threshold where TDUFT departs most radically from standard physics.
Okay, strap in.
We left the photon moving through dimension 2. To acquire mass, the energy must transition from dimension 2 into dimension 3.
The 3D space we live in.
Right. The text describes this transition as occurring through a process of vibration or elastic collision. The lattice points of the ether are essentially constructed of photons. When a wave function attempts to cross the boundary into 3D space, it must undergo a profound transformation.
And this is the part of the source material that made me reread the page 3 times.
It's a massive paradigm shift.
Because the text explicitly claims that the Higgs boson, the famous God particle that the standard model relies on to give everything in the universe its mass, is actually just the photon.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we're looking at a complete redefinition of what a particle is.
Yeah, definitely.
In the standard model, the universe is filled with an invisible Higgs field, and particles act like they are moving through molasses. The more they interact with the molasses, the more mass they have.
Right, the drag creates the mass.
The TDUFT discards the molasses entirely. It states that mass is a dimensional permission event.
A dimensional permission event. I want to make sure I understand the mechanics of that. Are you saying that mass isn't a thing you acquire from a field, but more like a toll you pay to enter a new dimension?
That is the conceptual mechanism, yes.
Okay.
A photon in dimension 2 has no mass, but when its wave function vibrates violently enough to cross the boundary into dimension 3, the geometric requirement to exist in 3D space is what we perceive as mass.
Wow.
The general property rule for this transition is that mass equals dimension cubed multiplied by time squared.
So mass is just the physical consequence of 2D geometry vibrating its way into our 3D world.
Exactly.
Let's look at the actual mass emergence equation the text uses to prove this. It's essentially a geometric rewrite of classical equations.
It is.
It states that mass equals the speed of light multiplied by g multiplied by little t, all divided by d squared. Let's not get bogged down in the raw algebra here, but let's break down how these variables physically function, starting with g.
In traditional physics, g is the gravitational constant. But here, g is called the gravitational inversion clause.
Inversion clause.
Mathematically, it involved a complex polynomial of the golden ratio and time. But conceptually, it operates exactly as the name implies, an inversion. Think of turning a mathematical fraction upside down.
Okay.
In this fractal universe, gravity isn't a pulling force, it is a structural inversion. The math simplifies to equal 1 over time to the 4th power, which is geometrically identical to 1 over density squared.
So the gravitational piece of the equation is literally just a function of inverse density and time. I get that. Then we multiply by little t, the time operator.
Right.
I noticed that in Ducas's math, time is defined purely as a negative inverse of velocity. If velocity, the golden ratio, is the forward motion of geometry stacking together, then time is the inverse drag. It is the mathematical resistance that gives the geometry its structure.
That resistance is vital. Finally, to complete the mass equation, we divide all of that by d squared. This variable is termed the charge gate.
The charge gate.
Mathematically, it is the golden ratio cubed. But physically, you can think of the charge gate as a sieve or a toll booth between dimensions.
A toll booth between dimensions. That makes perfect sense. If you are a wave of energy trying to enter 3D space, you can't just slide in freely.
No, there are geometric rules.
You have to fit through the charge gate. Your geometry has to perfectly align with the golden ratio cubed. And if it does, you are granted permission to enter dimension 3.
And this brings us to the ultimate verification of the theory.
The proof is in the pudding.
When you take all these purely geometric concepts, the speed of light derived from Trinitarian recursion, the gravitational inversion clause, the time resistance, and the geometric toll booth of the charge gate, and you run the equation.
It yields a mass of nearly 125 gigaelectron volts, or GeV.
Yes, exactly, 125 GeV.
Let's really think about the significance of that number. For decades, the smartest minds on Earth debated how particles get mass.
It was the biggest mystery in physics.
They spent billions of dollars building the Large Hadron Collider at CERN, a 17-mile underground ring, just to smash particles together at near light speed, millions of times a second.
A massive undertaking.
And in 2012, after sifting through mountains of debris, they finally observed the resonance of the Higgs boson. The measurement. 125 GeV standard model physicists had to manually calibrate their theories backward to make their math fit that physical observation.
Yet, TDUFT arrives at that exact 125 GeV resonance without requiring any manual calibration or human adjustment.
It just pops right out of the geometry.
Exactly. The mass of the Higgs boson isn't a random weight assigned by an arbitrary universe. It emerges naturally, perfectly, out of the golden ratio interacting with dimensional space.
That is incredible.
The standard model found the number through empirical brute force. TDUFT derives the number through elegant, inherent geometry.
So what does this all mean? If we step back from the dimensional boundaries and the charge gates, we are looking at a universe that is breathtakingly elegant.
It really changes your perspective.
Physics isn't just a messy house where an architect threw darts at a board to pick the speed of light or the mass of a particle. It is a proportional dimensional resonance.
Everything fits together.
From the precise speed that light travels through a vacuum down to the exact mass of the transition particle that allows physical reality to exist in 3 dimensions, everything is anchored in the golden ratio.
It is a unified, infinite fractal where the macro is a flawless mirror of the micro.
Which is just beautiful.
This raises an important question, though.
Oh.
When a theory successfully maps the ultimate speed limit of space and the fundamental weight of matter as pure geometric resonance, it forces us to rethink the concept of substance.
What do you mean by substance?
Well, we have spent centuries looking for the smallest solid building block of reality. But if the universe has no center, and everything is just a mathematical relationship of velocity and time vibrating across dimensions, then physical reality itself is nothing more than geometry in motion.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought to mull over. If the physical mass of a star and the absolute speed of light are simply dimensional permission events, just mathematical consequences dictated by the golden ratio vibrating from one dimension to another, could human consciousness be part of that same equation?
That's the real frontier.
Right. If our bodies and our neurons are built out of this infinite harmonic fractal, is our very perception of reality, our thoughts, and our subjective experiences just another form of mathematical resonance echoing through the lattice?
It's entirely possible under this framework.
Something to keep you up at night the next time you look in the mirror, or, the next time you look at the spiral of a sunflower. Because apparently both of you are running the exact same universal code.